What if I told you that everything you're trying to control, you can't, and everything you feel like is out of your control actually isn't? Woo! Talk about a mind flip. Hello, listeners. It's your host, Kira Wackett, back with another solo episode. Today, we're talking about control and the love-hate, all-or-nothing approach we seem to have with it. In this time of chaos and uncertainty, the longing for control and a sense of autonomy can consume us. The world seems to be slipping out from under us, and the inundation of fear, shame, and overwhelm is real. But the irony is, the more we try to control our lives, the less in control we feel. So where does that pressure to control come from? This has to do with an overvaluing of or fixation on a thought, feeling, or instance in our lives that creates a sense of tunnel vision. We become hyper-fixated on one or a few points and details in our lives and become distracted from seeing the rest of the picture. In our focus, we try to perfect or control this piece of our story, which inherently makes it seem like it holds greater importance and leaves us with a sense of overwhelm when we come back to and try to absorb everything else that's occurring in our lives. It's kind of like playing a game of whack-a-mole and only focusing on one hole, then getting overwhelmed with how many moles are popping up all around you when you step back and see the entire game. Only this is a little bit more anxiety-provoking because it's your life and, not an arcade game. But it can be tricky because we know this doesn't serve us. We know this tunnel vision isn't actually helping us, and yet we continue to do it. See, it's in our nature as humans to try and control the details of our story, to protect our place and connection in this world. And what's more, we have a false sense of responsibility and urgency that's created around various thoughts, feelings, and experiences that makes it hard to be present within, rather than attempt to control them. We try to shut off specific thoughts or feelings, such as anger, sadness, or thoughts deemed as bad, too scary, or outside of our control, such as death. We become hyper-focused on anything that colludes with our shame brain. Someone might be upset at you, or you're coming off weird or wrong, or you should be doing or being X. And we ruminate on ideas, feelings, and experiences that keep us stuck in what ultimately becomes a problem-saturated storyline in which we're the central concern. Now, this weirdly connects to a part of our brain that assumes that if we're hypervigilant and are constantly on the lookout to the threats facing our sense of self-worth and value, we can either correct them before others notice or react when necessary to survive. But this only perpetuates the state of belief that we're constantly facing a threat of disconnection, or that we have to perform at a certain level to be good enough or worthy. And with our fear brain working like an overprotective parent, it can go haywire when left unchecked. Suddenly, we can find ourselves analyzing every detail of our day, assuming responsibility for things outside of our control or narrative, and creating new perceived threats based on the belief that it prepares us for any possibility. And the result is that essentially there's a complete depletion of our energy, ultimately turning us into an overer, an overanalyzer, overcontroller, overspender, overperfector. The list goes on. And this pattern of action leads us to get stuck in a chase and self-fulfilling prophecy to be enough, but to only feel as though we'll never be enough. So what do? We need to learn to tame that pull in our brains to over and help our fear brain learn a greater degree of scrutiny in deciding what is and isn't an active threat or imminent danger for us to focus on. So there are 3 things that you can do right now. First, do some investigative reporting on your shame experience. So again, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that shame is the fear of not belonging, the fear of not being good enough or worthy of connection. I'll put a link to that intro episode that I did, that shame overview, Shame 101, so you can go back and listen to that. And if you're a visual person, I'll put a link to a video that I did on YouTube that talks about it as well. As you're going through and learning about your shame, it's important to really ask yourself, where did my shame come from? What's the impact it's having on my life, and how can I begin to dismantle it? From here, create a control wheel. I'll put a link in the show notes to a worksheet that I made on this, but essentially what you're doing is putting a big circle in the middle of a sheet of paper. Inside of that, you're going to put everything that's in your control. Now, this is really going to be focused on what you do, how you respond, how you react, the boundaries that you set. So everything inside of that circle is what's in your wheelhouse. You can be the one that ultimately controls what happens, how it looks, the outcome. Outside of the circle is everything that's outside of your control, which is 98% of things in your life. What other people think about you, what they think about the world, what happens to you, what someone else says, how they react, your past, that's a big one that we get stuck, your future, and if everything works out or doesn't work out, and all the fears that you have about what could happen. Now, this feels a little rudimentary, and this is one of the most powerful exercises because what you're doing is starting to recognize what you can take ownership of and what you can't. Now, finally, step 3, you can learn to let go of those thoughts that are keeping you stuck in that game of whack-a-mole. I want you to practice a technique called cognitive diffusion, whereby you learn to see your thoughts and feelings for what they are, experience them in waves, and not allow yourself to get hyper-focused on them or stuck in that problem-saturated storyline. So I'm going to include a link to a video that I did on YouTube on this a while back so you can learn a little bit more about and walk through this process. But ultimately, again, what you're doing in these 3 steps is figuring out your shame story, learning what you can and can't control, and really reflecting on how that's connected to your shame, and then learning how to let go of things that you can't control and releasing thoughts that don't serve you. So as we wrap up this episode, I always love to hear from you. So make sure that you check out the Q&A, fill out the poll, or send me a voice memo so that we can connect on what's coming up for you, what reflections, what ahas or insights that you have, and I can support you in this work. If you found today's episode valuable and insightful, I encourage you to leave a review, hit that 5-star button, and of course, share this episode with someone you think could benefit from hearing it. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And remember, change takes time. And every step counts. So stay the course, stay hopeful, and stay committed to your well-being. We'll be back with more insightful discussions to support you on your journey. Until then, take care, and we'll catch you in the next episode.